Well, good morning. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday, and I am the chair of the Audit Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I will call meeting 6 of the Audit Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference. Staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference. As City Hall remains closed, the public will continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live online at YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays and technical issues which we may experience. We currently have 4 registered public speakers. The clerk staff have connected to all registered speakers to the meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Audit Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Before we begin, I want to remind you about the important health and safety measures that we must follow today. All in-person members and staff have been seated 2 meters apart. Please stay in your designated seat, do not change seats, or sit in another seat. When entering, exiting, or moving about the room, you must wear a face covering. Sanitization kits have also been provided on the desktops. Attendance in Committee Room 1 is limited to only those persons who are required for the meeting. A number of clerks, audiovisual, and IT staff are here with us today. Members, this is a paperless meeting. The clerk has provided all agenda materials via the CMP, the clerk's meeting portal. IT staff will be available to help in-person and remote members with their devices in any technical issues that may arise. I would like to remind staff to keep their mics muted and their videos turned off unless they need to answer questions or speak to the committee. This will make it easier for me as chair and for those watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate and vote on the items. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and ensure that your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, I'll ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question or speak staff. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they turn on their video, if applicable, and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that today, whether you are participating in today's meeting in person or remotely, you must submit and approve your motions by email. The clerk staff will not print motions for your review. If you need to confer with the clerk staff in the room, you must stay 2 meters apart at all times. Staff are available at Audit Committee, so AUDITCTTE at toronto.ca to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of council attending the meeting today, I would encourage you to turn on your video so that I know that you are present and give you the opportunity to ask questions of staff or speak. This will also assist the clerk staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none, I'm going to take just one moment on a point of privilege to welcome our new committee clerk, Julie Lavertu. We all know the importance of the role of the clerk, and I just want to give Julie a warm welcome and to thank you in advance for all the help that you're going to give me to make it through this meeting today. I also want to just take a quick moment to acknowledge the service of Rosemary McKenzie, who was the clerk here for many years. Rosemary has retired in the period since the last Audit Committee meeting to this one, after 30 years of service with the City of Toronto. I just want to give one moment to just give my personal thanks. People don't know, but there's dividers between the desks here, and the ones at the front are cut back because that allows the clerk to reach over and kick me in the shin if I miss a line here. So Julie, you're going to be challenged with the 2 meters apart. But I'll tell you, Rosemary certainly helped me through a lot of meetings, and I really wanted to say thanks to her. And I just really, on behalf of the committee and the citizens of Toronto, we don't always recognize the staff and the clerks. They do magical things. They turn the gray area and the mushiness of the meeting into things like black and white documents that record the law that's passed and really record history. And it's no easy task. And I really thank Rosemary for all that she's done and the experience that she brought to the table. And I know that this committee feels the same and that we will miss her, but wish her very, very well in her retirement. Hopefully she's not watching now, but we'll have a chance to see this one day in her retirement. So thank you. Next, we need a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting on February 10th, 2020. May I have a motion for that? Councillor Nunziata. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. We have 12 items on the agenda. Let's proceed with an agenda review. I'm also going to propose at the end of this we reorder a couple of matters to make the meeting easier. The first item is AU 6.1, Employee Health and Benefits Fraud involving a medical spa. Since there's a presentation on this item, I will hold it down. The next item is AU 6.2, Audit of Winter Road Maintenance Program, Phase 1, Leveraging Technology and Improving Design and Management of Contracts to Achieve Service Level Outcomes. There is a presentation and registered public speakers, so I will also hold this item down. The next item is AU 6.3, Strengthening Accountability and Outcomes for Affordable Housing, Understanding the Impact of Affordable Home Ownership Program. There is a presentation and registered public speakers on this item, so I will also hold it down. The next item is AU 6.4, Continuous Controls Monitoring Program, Opportunity to Reduce Cost of Dental Benefits. There is a very brief presentation on this item, and I will hold it down. And I also acknowledge that there will be an opportunity to join this with item 6.1, so that 6.1 and 6.4 may be considered together, since they're both about benefits. The next item is AU 6.5, Auditor General's follow-up of the outstanding recommendations, new improved automated process. There is a report from Madam Auditor General. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item, or would anyone like to move the recommendations? Councillor Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. The next item is AU 6.6, Status of the Auditor General's Risk and Opportunity Assessment of the City and its Major Agencies and Corporations. There is a report from Madam Auditor General with a recommendation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Seeing none, would anyone wish to move the recommendation of the report? Councillor Nunziata is moving the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. The next item is AU 6.7, Review of 260 268th Street land transaction, no wrongdoing identified. Are there any members wishing to hold this item? Seeing none, may I have a motion from a member to move the recommendation in the Madam Auditor General's report? Councillor Ford, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. The next item is AU 6.8, Status of the Financial Statement Audits of the City's Agencies and Corporations for the year ended December 31st, 2019. There is a report from Madam Auditor General with a recommendation. Would anyone wish to hold this item? Seeing none, may I have a motion from a member to adopt the recommendation? Councillor Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. The next item is AU 6.9, Financial Statements for the years ended December 31st, 2018 and December 31st, 2019, Agencies and Corporations. There are two recommendations on this item. The first is that City Council receive for information the financial statements, and a recommendation for the Audit Committee to receive information on the 2019 financial statements. Would anyone wish to move the recommendations as they are listed in the report? Councillor Ford, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. The next item is AU 6.10, Arena's 2019 Audited Financial Statements. There is a report from Madam Auditor General with a recommendation. Would anyone wish to hold this item? Seeing none, may I have a motion from a member to adopt the recommendations in the report? Councillor Nunziata is moving the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. AU 6.11, Community Centres, 2019 Audited Financial Statements. There is a report from Madam Auditor General with a recommendation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Seeing none, may I have a motion from a member to adopt the recommendations in the report? Councillor Ford, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And the last item is AU 6.12, a non-competitive award of contracts for IT and cybersecurity audits. There is a report from Madam Auditor General with a recommendation. Are there any questions on this item? Would a member wish to hold it? I see no indications. May I have a motion from a member to adopt the recommendation in Madam Auditor's report? Councillor Nunziata is moving the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. So members, I just indicated that for efficiency, I thought it would be okay to move and consider both AU 6.1 and AU 6.4 together. And I would suggest that we move 6.1 later in the queue because there are no speakers on it. And that way, Madam Auditor can deliver a combined presentation and efficiently deal with the matters as they are of similar subject. Is there any opposition to that? Can I consider that the committee's consent? Thank you. Next, we will have two audits, and in both cases, there are speakers, and in both cases, there are presentations. So the first audit that we will consider on the list is AU 6.2, which is the audit of the Winter Road Maintenance Program, Phase 1, leveraging technology and improving design and management of contracts to achieve service level outcomes. I'm going to propose that we have the presentation first, and I just want to confirm, Madam Auditor, that you're ready with the presentation. I understand it's the technical challenges of putting that all together. So if I've got a nod, I've got a yes. We will proceed with that, and I know we have a speaker, and I'll just ask for your patience as we go through the presentation. We will go to you and hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will kindly ask the clerk to put the presentation up. And while she's doing that, I'll introduce my team: Assistant Auditor General Tara Anderson, Richir Patel, who is the Senior Audit Manager, Anil Bak, Saba Mohammed, Emily He, and Aditi Batish. So winter maintenance is one of the largest contracts with the city. And whenever you have large contracts, and specifically some of my past recommendations around contract management, where there have been weaknesses, this is an area where we thought it would be important to look at the contracts to make sure that they're operating effectively, and then to, as we renew contracts within the next 2 years, to make sure that we have the right controls in place. So for the first slide, in relation, we're going to go over the background, we're going to go over the issues we found, and the issues are in 3 buckets. Next slide, please. The issues are in 3 buckets. Using technology to the fullest potential. The second area is a recurring theme, which is contract management needs improving. And the third area is key performance indicators to make sure that they're tracked. So in other words, modernize the fleet, manage it to the contract using the technology, and then identify your key outcomes and measure to that. So by way of background, on the next slide, you can see we wanted to see if City Council's service levels were being met and making sure that the contractor was performing to make sure that they were being held to account to the contract. And so we took the time period of 2018 to 2020. We sampled 850 vehicles. This would be 1 day per vehicle. We looked at 261,000 payments. And if you look at the next slide to really give you a context, we examined, can you move forward with the slides, please? Yeah, thank you. Nope, the other way, please. Yes, stop. So if you see in the bottom right-hand corner, there was 4,400 hours examined. So that'll give you the extent of the examination. So we have a 98% confidence level in relation to the samples that we've conducted and we looked at. So the next slide, please. So winter maintenance, really you have about, you have 7 years of contracts. It really snows about 7 to 13 days a year. So the time that the machinery is on the road is a small amount of time, but you have to have the fleet on standby for most of the period to be ready to go. City Council, as you can see, has different service targets for different kinds of roads. So expressways, you have to clear them within 2 to 3 hours, major roads, around 6 to 8 hours, and neighborhood roads around 14 to 16 hours. So that is the target, and what we wanted to see is the city performing against those targets? Are we measuring against those targets? Next slide, please. The focus of this slide is that over 5 years, we spend like hundreds of millions of dollars, around $400 million. $237 million is spent on standby. So we looked at that and we thought that might be an opportunity to see if we can optimize how the fleet is operating so that we can save money going forward. So this is a two-phased audit. The first phase is looking at the contract, and now that we can see the amount being spent on standby and the cost of salt, the second phase is going to be looking at a cost-benefit analysis to see if we can make recommendations to management to help to modernize their fleet. And one of the areas is to make sure we have the right mix of resources so that we can lower costs. And one of the bigger buckets is the standby cost, which we know we have to have standby, but do we have the right mix of fleet and the right number of vehicles? So we'll do that in phase 2. But for this part of the audit, we looked at contract compliance. So the next slide, we talked about 3 buckets. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the first bucket and then hand it over to the Assistant Auditor General, Tara. So the fleet has GPS. The challenge is that they're not leveraging the GPS technology to its fullest potential. GPS you have the ability to manage with GPS. You can see, for example, when a snowplow leaves the yard, instead of having a clipboard or relying on information of people telling you, GPS can track where vehicles are, when they leave the yard, when they come back, when they stop. They can track all that information. And what I found was that there's a lot of manual processes still built in. We're kind of doing things as a city the way things have always been done, even though there's some new technology. So even though there's dollars talked about later on for savings, I feel the biggest bang for the buck is really let's leverage the technology. We have it in place. So we paid for it. It's on the machinery. Let's leverage that and do the kinds of things that we did within the audit. We can look at when vehicles were leaving the yard. You can look at salt distribution. You can look at the routes and optimize routes. So it's time to now take this technology, and as you go forward with the new contracts, build a contract so you can monitor using the technology as much as possible, because the precision on the technology is really good. The second area in relation to technology is that a lot of the GPS weren't functioning. Now, you can have reports to identify each week, each day, which vehicles GPS is not functioning. Now, if the functioning is the result of something with the contractor will not be paid standby. So it's really important to know. If the functioning has to do with the city has to make sure it gets fixed, but it's the city's overall responsibility to monitor whether the GPSs that we're paying for are actually working, and then if they are not, to really problem solve to identify and make sure they're working. And we have to make sure that you have to have all vehicles, including spare vehicles. We had situations, for example, where a vehicle didn't move from the yard when there was a snow event, and the explanation was, well, they used a different spare vehicle. Well, we couldn't track that vehicle. And so I have to caution in relation to our findings, there's about 30% of the findings of our sample that we could not get GPS information. So it might not be that some contractors are doing worse or better. There's 30% of them that we couldn't identify what was happening because the GPS isn't working. You look down below, you'll see some of them, one of them wasn't working since 2015, 9 of them 2016. Since 2018, 76 of them haven't been working. These are 76 vehicles. So our question is, how are the vehicles being monitored? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Go back one slide, please. Thank you. So GPS is important, and actually I'll ask Tara after this slide to take over, but GPS is important for many reasons. You can use GPS for so many things. So it's important to know when contractors leave the yard, as I explained. You can know when contractors stop. You can verify salt applications, the rate, the quantity that can have an environmental impact. You can check the routes. You can optimize routes. So there's so much that it can provide information-wise, and it's not always about checking to see if contractors are doing their job. It's really about optimizing the fleet, getting the best information on what's happening in a snow event, knowing where the complaints are coming in and being able to look at the route and see what happened on that route and marrying that information together to make sure that you understand what's happening so the problems can be solved. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Tara. She's going to continue to walk through and provide examples of each of these.
Thank you, Auditor General. And so next slide, please. So the GPS technology allows staff to track the in and out times of vehicles instead of someone needing to physically stand at the gate and check for this. And right there, it saves staff time and frees them up for more value-added activities. Looking at the table here, taken from our report, it shows an example of the in and out times reported by contractors for 5 vehicles and what the GPS records show. The exact timing of the contractor reporting alone should provide a red flag that it is worth staff looking into possible rounding or inaccurate recording. However, by going to the GPS record, it is easy to see the exact timing of when the contractor vehicles left and returned. Some of the differences are small, but can add up to large numbers, and others are more significant. So you'll see that some actually return about 3 hours prior to what is stated on the contractor's operating log. And this kind of functionality of the in and out times isn't something that's new. This is an immediate step that the division can take to implement for this next winter season. Next slide, please. So this visual gives you an idea of what it looks like on the GPS system when you're tracking a vehicle. As mentioned, staff can track the vehicle's in and out time. Staff can also use GPS to track whether the contractor is starting on time and where it stops and for how long, or whether the vehicle's completed the assigned route, and therefore whether the hours claimed are valid and accurate for payment. This particular example, I'll be speaking into further details further in the presentation. Next slide, please. The division has a salt management plan, and it's important to know how much salt is being applied, not just for inventory control and cost effectiveness, but also for environmental reasons. Currently, GPS provides the ability to calibrate the salt spreaders, but this is not being used. Instead, staff are relying on manual scales, but these have also not been calibrated. So we weren't able to quantify the issue of wastage from salt spreaders as a result. The division is already paying for this GPS technology, so it makes sense to be using it to verify the salt application rates and quantities to make sure the contractors are complying with the division salt management plan and environmental regulations. So overall, there are many opportunities for the division as well as the city to use GPS technology to its fullest potential and to modernize processes. Next. And I'll turn it over to our Auditor General if she would like to speak to this slide. All right, we'll keep going.
No, I'm just turning on my microphone. Thank you, Assistant Auditor General. So we're going to walk through each of these areas to make sure that you can see just some of the things that are fairly easily to do in relation to the contract. So building the contract so that you can monitor using GPS is critically important. So late starts, that would be one you can monitor easily each day. And you can see, for example, if the contractor is having an issue and you can interact and see if there's a problem and have it solved. That can be easily done. We were able to do that. Contractors claiming for more hours. There may be an explanation for the reason behind the late hours or the reasons and the differences in time. There may be an explanation. What was missing was the documentation. So if we have contractors claiming more hours or we have a situation where the times are different, that's a signal that's easy to check and then to interact with contractors and document. Because going forward, to hold people to account, the documentation has to be there. And that was something that we had challenges finding. Making sure that excessive stop times. So we saw some breakdowns. One contractor had quite a few breakdowns. We'll go over that. But there's some contractors that are stopping for a long period of time, and Tara will go over each of these, so 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Tara?
Thank you, Auditor General. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to speak to the top 3 issues we found with contractor performance. Just to reiterate, for all of these issues, they were identified by examining the GPS records, and it's important for staff to verify contract work against the GPS records prior to payment. The first issue is contractors later than they were called to start. And here's 2 examples from our audit of contractors starting late. In all cases, there were no notes in staff to provide an explanation, and no deductions were made to the contractor's payments. In total, we identified 83 vehicles leaving after the call-out time or later than the time reported on the contractor's operating log. So contractors are not being held accountable in the way that they should, and staff are not consistently assessing and enforcing liquidated damages for these delays. The total overpayment for this issue alone of late starts is $3.8 million over 5 years. Next slide, please. So contractors are paid based on the operating logs they submit that includes their route covered, timing, etc. And staff are generally not verifying contractors' work before payment. Here's 2 examples of contractors claiming more hours than they worked. In example 1, the contractor stated they finished work at 6 a.m. when the GPS records showed they returned at 11:37 p.m. the previous night for an extra 6 hours claimed. In the second example, a contractor claimed an extra 1 to 3 hours for each of its vehicles in its fleet of 25 vehicles for just 1 shift for a total of an extra 43 hours and 12 minutes just for that one. In total, we found 171 vehicles claimed an extra 195 hours. This issue of contractors claiming more hours than worked resulted in an estimated total overpayment of $1.2 million over 5 years. Next slide, please. The third contractor performance issue identified is contractors taking excessive stop times. It is possible there could be valid operational reasons for some stop times, such as salt being loaded on a vehicle or the driver taking a lunch break. However, the contracts themselves do not include any guidance on what is considered a reasonable stop time. For our audit, we used a threshold of 20% of total trip time and examined those stop times greater than this threshold. So that is breaks longer than 2 hours out of a 10-hour shift. We found that for approximately 45%, so 178 of the 405 plowing trips reviewed, there were excessive stop times. We noted that some contractors stopped up to 3 continuous hours during the middle of their night shift, and others took up to 40% of time as stop time, In this example, on the slide, one vehicle stopped for a total of 9 hours out of a 13-hour. And you can see by the coloring of the shapes, the one stop that's red was over 3 hours, the one that's orange was over 2 hours, and the one that is yellow is over 1 hour. We did not see any notes of staff questioning the stop times or explanations in the file for why these stops occurred. There were also no deductions to the payments made to contractors. So the issue of excessive stop times resulted in an estimated total overpayment of $1.3 million over 5 years. Next slide, please. So this table from our report provides a summary of the issues we identified with contractor performance by contractor. As you can see, it is a handful of contractors that have the highest number of issues, keeping in mind that we were only able to examine those with GPS records. We've provided this detailed information with contractor names to management so they can focus their follow-up efforts in addressing and resolving these issues. And one of the immediate next steps for this next winter season can be for management to ensure staff are verifying contractors' work to GPS records prior to payment. And the other immediate action is for staff to check that GPS devices are indeed functioning. And those actions alone will help to ensure that any contractor performance issues are addressed and resolved on a daily basis, and that payments are only made for services provided. There's also some issues with documentation that you can see on the table where staff can improve immediately for this next winter season, such as ensuring the call-out time is documented as well as the assigned route in kilometers. Next slide, please. The second area needing improvement in contract management practices is the design of the contract itself. Both contract design and contract management were noted in our Auditor General's Common Themes issued in January 2020. And both of these areas are critical to contracting out services and ensuring the city is paying for only the services it contracted to pay, and that the services provided are of the quality required and achieving the outcomes the city intends to achieve. For winter road maintenance, the contracts need to be clearer in the following 3 areas: responsibilities and timelines for reporting and resolving GPS issues, reasonable stop and break times, which is outlined, and liquidated damages. If the contract is not clear, it can result in inconsistencies in the management of contracts and assessment of liquidated damages, as well as overpayment to contractors, as you've seen through our audit. Next slide, please. The third area of contract management that needs improving is the verification of work and monitoring contracts. This is critical to hold contractors accountable, address any performance issues in a timely manner, and to ensure accurate payments to the contractors for their work performed. The following 3 areas need to be improved. For the first one, as outlined by our Auditor General, it's critical that staff use the GPS records to verify the contractor's work before payment. For the second one, there are not currently standardized processes, procedures, and forms for staff in monitoring contracts and in applying liquidated damages. So by standardizing these policies and procedures, that will help in improving the contract management practices. And the third area relates to standby payments with the express terms of the contract not being applied. And our Auditor General will speak to that point in further detail. Next slide, please.
So I just have a couple more slides and then we're finished with this item just to give you a time check, Chair. In relation to contract standby, this is really one of the major findings of the report. Essentially what happened is that the way the practice was working on the ground does not align to what the contract says. And a very basic understanding is contractors need to be paid every day while they're on standby or working. They have to be paid every day. But essentially what the contract outlines through very specific formulas in numerous contracts, and the express language is very clear in the contract, you get paid every day, but you don't get paid standby and work time for the exact same hours. That's what the contract says. On the ground, when contractors were working, they did get paid standby for those hours. And so if we applied that across the calculation, it's about $24 million. So the practice differed from the contract. The challenge is, why did that happen? Contract management has been a challenge, but the people who were working in the area have left. And so it's hard to determine. I think it's super important to make sure when we align our next contract that whatever the contract says, in this contract or any other contract, making sure that the group who's implementing on the ground and the people who are paying read the contract, it's simple enough and it's applied consistently so that all contractors are treated consistently. So that's, next slide, please. And the last area, we spoke a little bit about this. The service levels are there. It's going to be important to measure against them. And there should be a report coming back to council and how the contractors and the city is doing in relation to these specific indicators. Next slide, please. So there's lots of opportunity going forward. I think it's really important to have a quick win to get the GPS technology that we've already paying for working on all those vehicles. Contract management practices, going forward, leverage that technology to apply the contract to the contractors. And third is to develop performance indicators that make sense and reflect what City Council wants and report out against them and use data to back those. Next slide. So for the next contract cycle, important to work together, set up the contract payment system so it aligns with the contract, and then manage the express terms of the contract. That concludes my presentation. The report has 22 recommendations. I'd like to thank management for working with us on this report. They are going to be providing 3 or 4 slides, and then we'll be ready to take questions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Auditor General. It's Barbara. Can you all hear me? Okay. Next slide, please. First off, I just wanted to indicate our support and our alignment on the recommendations that are coming out of this audit. We have been working with the Auditor General on a number of items, but we're very pleased that she could arrange her work program for 2019 to be able to take on this audit in advance of our getting together to put forth contracts for the next contract cycle. So as you know and has been identified, these are relatively long-term contracts and they have multiple components. In fact, there were 47 of them that were issued in the 2015 cycle. And so we were fully understanding that we wanted to have a very good overview and understanding of where we needed to make improvement so that we could get that together in time for releasing the next set of contracts. So we are in support and alignment on these recommendations. We have seen this as a pretty collaborative process. We have a commitment to continuous improvement. I'll talk about that just briefly in a moment, and are already working on integrating the 22 recommendations into our business practices on the go forward. I think that it's fair to say that Transportation Services has a long history back from amalgamation of working on practices, and so our standard business practices, we have a lot of people in the organization that deliver these services. We have a lot of contractors involved, and so it's very, very important that our business practices are aligned with the express terms of the contract, as the auditor has said, and that we are able to train and ensure that our practices are reflective of that on the go forward so that we can stay consistent with the contract terms and deliver best value. Although our maintenance program and funds were spent as budgeted and planned, our future practices must be administered differently. And so we are continuing to explore options and best practices for a rate structure that serves our needs and delivers best value. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to remind the committee that we have undertaken over the past couple of years a reorganization in transportation services to move from a more diffuse method of delivery through districted offices to a reorganization that's grounded not only in a vision of continuous improvement, but brings all of our operations and maintenance section under one director, under the leadership of Vincent Sferrazza, who's going to talk to us in just a second. But that gave us the ability, and we've quickly started to do that, and will certainly continue to harmonize our business processes, make sure that we have standard procedures that are followed, that are tracked, that are managed, and that we can improve consistency and better align our resources. We have now 2 managers of contract development, delivery, and inspections. We've had them since last year. Those are relatively new positions. They will provide that oversight in the operations and maintenance unit, as well as 2 managers in road operations now who oversee all of the areas of the city. So it is no longer divided up into 4 sections. And the other piece that we added at the recommendation of the Auditor General at the outcome of our road paving audit was a centralized business performance unit that is different from the operations and maintenance section in transportation services. So provides that internal screen and oversight. We have a compliance manager, and we also have a performance outcomes manager as well, so that I feel like we are very well positioned now to take the recommendations here and move forward with some modifications for sure. So I'm going to hand it over to Vince just to talk about a couple more things, and then we'll be completed. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, committee members and everyone else on the line. So I'm just going to talk about some of the recommendations that the Auditor General has presented in her findings. I'm going to focus on the GPS and some contract administration and management areas. So with respect to the GPS technology, the Auditor General has done a very good job of essentially describing the situation as it was and as it is. As it was back in 2015, when we began these winter agreements, there was limited functionality with respect to GPS. And it wasn't incorporated or integrated within these current agreements to the fullest extent, or that we could leverage all these functionalities. The agreements, as they were structured back in 14 and 15, were primarily focusing on the GPS giving us data in defense of claims related to winter maintenance. So those would be your slips and falls and accidents and property damages. And we used the GPS data to provide us with the analysis information to either refute or corroborate those claims. And then over the years, we were able to use the GPS data to support PlowTO website. So as community members, I'm sure know, we now have a website where it's public facing, where residents can go online and see, in fact, where the vehicles are with respect to their operations. And that data comes from the GPS units. So back in 2015, we were using the corporate vendor. It's an enterprise corporate vendor. It is not a vendor exclusively for transportation services and not exclusively for winter maintenance agreements. It is a corporate enterprise vendor that we work with. Since 2015, that initial vendor has merged numerous occasions with large industry suppliers. We're now at the point, though, where the latest merger, we have at our disposal improved platforms and enhanced capabilities where we can use GPS in areas of contract management, payment management, performance management, where back in 2015, it was limited, and where in fact our current winter maintenance agreements did not request for that type of analysis. So recognizing that we do have this opportunity, and we have put together, or we are putting together a working team. And we've already reached out to technology services and fleet services and the vendor, and we will now look at how we can leverage the current GPS capabilities to improve both our current practices and, of course, for our future winter maintenance contracts. So we will now sit down together as a group and see how the GPS will be able to provide us with the analysis, with the data that will allow our staff to then verify the contracts, verify the information that we get from our contractors after each snow event, as the Auditor General has referenced in her presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be probably repeating some of the comments that have already been made. The Auditor General did mention that our current winter maintenance contracts are too reliant on the manual reports and checks. But having said that, and as I just referenced, we have an opportunity now to leverage GPS technology solutions to provide real-time objective data so that we could verify all the information that we receive, but ultimately for the next round of contracts, it would replace contractor run sheets and the current invoice payment procedures. With respect to staffing and our organization, as Barbara has referenced, the existing 47 winter maintenance contracts were issued and administered under the former Division 4 district model, where there were situations where you didn't have harmonized policies and harmonized business practices. But now we are in a position where we can, in fact, promote a more balanced approach between operations and contract management. I can tell you that, in fact, we have already started developing standardized operating procedure manuals, and we have offered contract management training for all staff who oversee the winter maintenance contracts. So with the SOPs, in fact, we've developed SOPs as it relates to GPS, where we provide specific instruction to our staff on determining that the vehicles, in fact, do have the proper GPS unit installed, that it's functioning, and that we will use that data to essentially oversee the performance of our contract. We are developing KPIs specifically for contract management. We have KPIs for operations. We have service levels. But now we need to develop, and we are developing KPIs as it pertains to contract management. And we also have a compliance review to ensure that all these strong management practices are being followed by our staff. Next slide, please. And this next slide is just to give you an overview of our moving forward on the winter maintenance contracts. So all 47 winter maintenance contracts are set to expire April 2022, every one. And we have started working as a team, and the team is comprised of staff from transportation services, from purchasing and category management, legal, and we have an external consultant helping us as well, where we are looking at the 47 agreements. And our objective is to review the existing formats and the terms. Our objective is to review the service deliveries. But most importantly is to incorporate the Auditor General's recommendations into all future winter maintenance contracts. So moving forward, we are looking at making changes immediately, but just as importantly, the future winter contracts will be based on the Auditor General's recommendations. So that's our presentation from Transportation, I believe, for the Auditor General as well.
Thank you very much. We do have a speaker on this. I'm just going to check with the clerk here that we're okay to make the technical link. I believe we have Chelsea Burke.
Hi.
Welcome,
sorry,
Chelsea.
Chair. Hi, Councillor Halliday. I've discovered that perhaps this is not, hello, perhaps, and good morning to everyone, by the way. I'm a student at Ryerson University. I'm a graduate student in the Masters of Journalism program. I've discovered that this perhaps is not the most appropriate forum for me to ask my questions to the Auditor General of the Transportation Division. So I do wish to excuse myself from the speakers list.
Understood. Chelsea, I can recommend that if you wanted to place a rhetorical question to us in the form of a comment, we'd be happy to take it. And, perhaps that gets integrated in our questioning of staff, which comes up next. But, you're most welcome to the Audit Committee, and if you have any comments to make just as a citizen of Toronto and in your reaction to this report, we're also glad to hear it from you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the invitation, Councillor Halliday. I'm just surprised by the number, and I actually want to thank the Auditor General's office for this report. During a time when a lot of, Toronto is suffering under COVID-19, I think that $31 million is, unfortunately a huge loss when money could have been, forwarded towards long-term care homes and the needs that a report in 2015, I believe, wanted monies, to help with the maintenance of these homes that are currently suffering. That money could have gone towards, housing for the homeless. So I want to thank you very much for this report. And I did, have questions about who the vendors were, for example, but I don't think this is the appropriate forum for me to be asking the Auditor General this question. I can probably email it. But I just as a citizen, I'm just surprised by the numbers. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for joining us, Chelsea. As is part of the process, are there any members of the committee that wish to ask you a question about what you told us today? No, it sounds like you get off the hook easy, so thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We will now turn over to members of the committee and ask if there are any questions of staff. I do see a signal from Councillor Ford, and I see a signal from Councillor Fillion. We'll take as number 2 in the queue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Just to start off, I agree with Chelsea's comments wholeheartedly, so I was glad she was able to put that forward to the committee. Madam Auditor General, long time no see. I think it's been less than 24 hours from the TPS meeting, so good to see you. So I want to start off a fantastic report, as usual. So were there any operating and Auditor General or Barbara, please feel free to answer. But were there any operating procedures put in place prior to the audit that looked at using GPSs or spoke to using GPSs when the fleet was put out?
I'll defer to transportation.
Okay, thank you. And through the speaker or through the chair, certainly as GPS technology, and I think Vince has identified through his remarks that GPS technology has evolved quite significantly, and the current enterprise solution vendor that we work with has merged and created a lot more capacity for us to be able to use GPS in a much more specific way. In terms of our operating practices over the past 7 years with regard to GPS and oversight of the contractors, I do think that's an area where we're focused on using GPS to be the back end for information for Plow TO, for that public facing information,
right.
And also, which was largely the use of it. So we have a real opportunity now to integrate operational practices consistently across the organization in order to get those outcomes and hold the contractors accountable in a more consistent way. So it's great that we have the technology now. We just need to use it to its capacity and potential.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
So I was just going to add to that. Was limited more to the focus for claims and for tracking some of the vehicles for monitoring the plows. But there were reports available back to 2015, things like stop reports. This is my understanding. Vehicle history reports. So there were some reports. Things probably have improved a lot since then. So it's good to continue to leverage going forward. And just quickly, in relation to the contractor names to Chelsea. The reason GPS wasn't working on 27% of the vehicles, and we felt it was unfair to identify anybody without having a consistent management practice in place, without making sure that everybody was treated consistently. So we intentionally are not identifying contractors. Management needs to get its management practices in place, as we just discussed. Moving forward, it might be a different conversation.
And if I may, Councillor, moving forward, we have already begun developing standard operating procedures as it relates to GPS. So yes, in fact, we are putting practices in effect to ensure that staff are inspecting the vehicles for GPS units, that they're functioning properly, that it's providing the data that we need. And as I mentioned, we are going to be working together with information technologies and with fleet, which they're the ones who oversee the enterprise system on behalf of the corporation. We are, in fact, going to be developing even more SOPs to ensure that we do get the information from the provider in a format that our staff can easily interpret and can apply.
Okay, excellent. So I have a few more questions here. I'm probably going to run out of time, which is all right. I may request a second round. So on page 9 of the presentation, something caught my eye, and I just wanted to, if we could go to that somehow. If that's possible. It was referencing, I believe, 5 vehicles that were looked at in the audit when you had the expected times of being out on the road and then the actuals. I think it was broken into 5 vehicles. Was that an example of a random sample of 5 vehicles? Was it the worst of the 5 vehicle, or was it the worst 5 vehicles? So what was that snapshot? What does that look like? So I believe there's about a difference of about 4-5 hours off what they were supposed to be doing.
Councillor Ford, we're just going to try to flash that on the screen before we get a response, just so we can see the material. It's the joy of electronic meetings. We have to do it linearly.
Quite all right.
I'm sure we'll go to a second round, but that's your last question in the first round. Yeah, and I'll ask staff to answer that, but I just want to, for everyone's benefit, display that for just a few moments, and then we can go to the camera for the response.
Yeah. I have with me Richard Patel, who is the senior on the audit, but
thank you.
We took our sample as a random sample across 850 different days, and then we did this for every single vehicle in that 850 sample. And then this was one of the sheets that we saw. Richard, could you please explain that?
So this is a specific one vendor. So this was randomly selected operating sheet, wherein all 25 vehicles on that specific sheet from one contractor had this problem. So we only are showing 5 vehicles, but all 25 vehicles had exactly the same problem. And this relates to another example. We were saying 43 hours of overcharging. So that was for one shift, one contractor, all 25 vehicles, same problem.
Very concerning. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Fillion, I have you next on the list. And
thank you. And,
is there any other questions just before we begin? Because I only have a moment here to capture anyone raising their hand. Okay, Councillor Nunzi, I'll get you on the list. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. Most of my questions, I think, will need to be on camera, but I'll start out with some very broad ones of the Auditor General. It appears to be based on your work, not only on with this department, but with other departments, that we have a fairly systemic problem with lack of oversight of contractors, and contractors who will either take advantage of that or inadvertently be overcompensated. What's kind of the fundamental problem here?
I think the issue is when you contract out the responsibility, you don't contract out the accountability. It's not a situation of out of sight, out of mind, and we're very grateful for the contractors doing the work. There's no doubt about that. But we ourselves have to be organized to think actually proactively. So the reports that I've provided in relation to the integrated billing speaks to contract management by design. And what that means is that when we decide services we need, think about how it's going to be monitored on the ground and make sure that the technology and the contract marries up so that you can proactively monitor and then work with the contractors to make sure the communication is there and any issues are resolved, and then also to hold people to account if that becomes an issue. Setting up that contract management in the beginning, and these are big contracts. If you miss a line in the beginning, then it goes off and the problem becomes, or the dollars become bigger and bigger. So this is really about proactively looking forward to make sure it's set up right the first time.
Is there anything in our administrative structure that you would see as contributing to a lack of oversight?
I think there's a bit of a culture in maybe some of the more historical areas. I would say like older areas like paving and snow removal and you know, maybe even forestry. We do things generally the way it's always been done. And you have to work in partnership with contractors, but you have to remember it's not a marriage. It's really cordial, not cozy. It's really my responsibility as a city, or the city's responsibility, to provide oversight. So I would say that the contract management, everybody who's approving a payment has to think about what needs to be in place to make sure that we pay and we're doing the right things. Take a check, you know, in these 5 and 7 year contracts, really go and make sure. So really, I think the culture of not just doing things the way we've always done it, modernize, but I think the biggest thing is contract management by design. Set it up so it's easy to monitor on the ground.
I wanted to dig down a little bit on the system of oversight here, and I'll ask the Auditor General first, and then the General Manager afterwards if she wishes to add anything to it. But I'm trying to picture somebody sitting at a desk somewhere who is supposed to be monitoring the in and out of vehicles, for example, and you find evidence that the vehicles are not coming in and out, for example, as reported. So who is sitting somewhere, and what is the nature of their job to monitor that and to detect when something isn't right? And I'll either with that example or a better one if you have one.
I think this is really about systemic change. I know when I was overseeing the contract management for a large outsourcing contract in another province, you know, there was a situation there where the operation on the ground wasn't the same as the contract. And really, you know, when you design a contract, the people who are actually running the contract are completely separate, and making sure that they understand what the contract says and that their operations are set up to help them, I think is really important. And the General Manager of Transportation, really, I had some background insight into some of the operations in relation to paving since she's come aboard, and she is the right person with the business unit to monitor go forward, I feel. I think this is a systemic problem and an opportunity to look at any contract that we have to make sure what's in the contract agrees to how things are operating. So over to the General Manager of Transportation.
Thank you, Auditor General, and through the chair to Councillor Fillion. I think that the administrative challenges that you asked in your previous question are certainly ones that were evident in transportation services previously. Before our reorganization, we did not have a way to do those checks and balances, and we also didn't necessarily have a way to have consistent oversight, consistent practices, consistent training. And another thing that I think is really important is not only the people on the ground who need to check in, those contractors, which is critical and important and was not being done consistently, but also that there's a check and balance within the organization to be able to take a look at that information, those performance metrics before those payments get made. And so we are now set up administratively to do that on the go forward. And so that's another reason why we're pleased that this information is available at this time so that we can integrate it into our current business practices and our contracts going forward.
Thank you. I think my remaining questions are in camera.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. I agree and understand with the process. What we will do is we'll go through member questions and we'll hold the item down in order to go into camera at the end of the meeting, because from a technical perspective, it's much easier for the clerk's staff to organize it that way. So with the consent of members, we'll continue with the questions that are public. Councillor Nunziata, I have you as the next person to question.
Yes, I just have one question, and thank you to the Auditor General for the report. As usual, you do an amazing job. But I can't remember, but I recall about a year ago, last winter, where we received a lot of complaints about the service levels on snow removal, and you know, that there were piles of snow piled on the sidewalks, and there was thousands of complaints on that. And we did move a motion, I think, from the a letter from the mayor's office on looking, having to investigate the service levels and how we can improve. Is that another report that you'll be bringing forward, or where's that report? I can't remember if we ever had that report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did in fact submit a report to IEC last year. So in 2019, we did report back on service levels.
Oh, okay. I don't recall that. Okay, because I think that's the biggest complaint we get from our constituents. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nunziata. I have, before we go, I know Councillor Ford had some additional, but I'd like to ask just a question of the Auditor General. My own time started here. It's simple. There's a lot on this report, and I understand that the main emphasis is to make sure that we've got things organized and optimized to help inform the procurement process of the next round of contracts. But there's a lot to do in the interim based on what you've learned. And I wondered if you could tell us, committee and really council, in your advice, what is it that needs to be done on an immediate and urgent basis? What are the most important things that need to be done prior to the start of the next winter plow season? And then what else would you recommend that we do working through and following the next winter season? So, call that 6 months to a year out. And then I would say that the balance of your recommendations would be the ones that would want to be implemented, ensuring that it's in place prior to the next contract. But if you could just talk about the really, really important issues up front, and then what would have to be done within the next calendar year, knowing it takes a bit of time and experience over the winter to get done.
I would say before the winter season, get the GPSs working. Get reports to see which ones aren't working so that you can start to collect the data. You can't make change unless you understand what's happening. Reconcile where with the billings, the late starts, start monitoring, start getting the reports in place. We have samples of reports that we've run that we're willing to share. Once a week, run a status report to make sure that all GPS remain working. It's good to get it set up. But the contract says if the GPS is not working and it's the contractor's fault, then the contractor doesn't get standby. So we have to make sure that we identify which GPSs are working and aren't working. And if they're not working, then a new GPS can go in. Now, the GPS technology behind it, you can see if somebody is potentially, maybe tampering with something. And I'm not suggesting that the contractors have, but if there's something wrong with the GPS, the diagnostics with the firm that's monitoring the GPS can identify what the issues are. It's important to monitor vehicles coming in and out. It's important to monitor breakdowns. So when a contractor reports excessive breakdowns, it's good to know why. If you have an old piece of equipment on standby and it breaks down when it goes out, and we did find one contractor that had excessive problems here, we maybe shouldn't be paying standby for those. So make sure that all vehicles are working. and just hold to the contract. Now, 6 months out, once you get all the GPS working and you start to get the reports, and those reports really should come back to this committee potentially, or to council, or to another committee, then your data is going to change, because you have to keep in mind that 30% or almost 27 to 30% of the GPSs aren't working. So you're going to see different numbers, and that's because now you have a bigger population. So take that new information, and some of the items that we identified in our report, start monitoring those things. So quick wins, get them working, make sure you keep checking that they're working, and then do the reporting that we have in our report, and then monitor against KPIs.
If I may also just supplement some of that as well. We, in fact, have started, and I made reference already to some of the standard operating procedures as it pertains to the GPS. So make sure that each of the appropriate GPS units, because each GPS unit is actually assigned to a specific vehicle, and that GPS unit is functioning, and that we will, in fact, be able to receive data from that particular unit. So we are doing that this winter season. Our staff actually have started. We already began opening up some of the winter depots. They began last week. Let's hope we don't have to use them too early, but nevertheless, they have started, and staff have started inspecting the vehicles to ensure that the units are in place and functioning, and that be an ongoing inspection throughout the entire season. It's not just happening once at the beginning of the year. There has to be a systematic schedule where, in fact, we are proactive in ensuring that the GPS units are functioning properly, and taking it to the next step, actually begin receiving data and how we can use that data for verifying the contractor information. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go away, Vince. My next question is for you and Barbara Gray. The auditor talked about the application of SALT in her report, but she didn't go deep into it. She just made some suggestions that the GPS systems can cause better performance with SALT. Now, so SALT is a material. It costs money to us. It ends up on the road, and it also has an environmental cost. I wondered if you saw value and opportunity in this report to improve the process that we have to put SALT on the road, and the performance tracking and the efficiency of the use of the product. And I think there's some open reporting that is still due to the I&E committee, and I wondered if you could offer some comment or assurance that the information and ideas from this report are going to get translated over to your SALT strategy, and we don't need to place motions on that, but maybe you'll bring those ideas through that report and give us some optimism that there's room to improve based on the technology.
So to you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then Vince can get to the details. But we absolutely will be using the recommendations of this report, not just to deal with SALT, which, as you know, is a very important component of our winter maintenance program, but also has really needs to be managed in order that it doesn't have undue environmental impacts. So anything that we can do on continuous improvement with our SALT management plan and the outcomes of that, and how we can better calibrate our vehicles and make sure that the application is hitting the right mark but is not overdoing it, that certainly has a cost implication as well. So we will absolutely integrate that. And you are correct, we are bringing a report back to IEC. I believe it is in November to open up another discussion on our SALT management plan.
So the only thing I would add to that is, yes, we do have an opportunity to utilize modern technology for us to inspect the application of the SALT to ensure that the calibration rates that are established at the beginning of the season are maintained, and that we use modern technologies and applications that will provide data to our staff that will trigger any need for action. So the data should tell them how much SALT is being applied, and if that SALT application seems to be consistent with the calibration rates that are established within our SALT management plan and within the agreements. So absolutely, we see an opportunity here to leverage modern technology.
Thanks very much. Councillor Ford?
And that report is in December. I'm sorry, Councillor, I just wanted to clarify that report comes to December IEC, not November.
Great, so that's imminent. Thank you. Councillor Ford, you indicated you desired a second set of questions that would be separate from whatever we may choose to ask in camera. I thought I'd check with Councillor Matlow if we're good. I think Councillor Matlow is good. Go ahead, Councillor Ford.
Yeah, just quickly, I have two more questions I wanted to get to. And they've kind of been covered off in some of my colleagues' questions. So one was referencing page 17 of the report. Maybe while we pull that up, I will go to my other question. So it's around checks and balances, which we have kind of spoken about. So in the reorganization of transportation services, from how I understand some of the answers, is that it's making it easier and it's more structured to have checks and balances on contracts.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct. In addition to having a consolidated functional operations and maintenance unit, so everybody who works in operations and maintenance reports directly up to Vince Ferrazza, as opposed to having 4 different directors. So it gives us the ability to train and manage comprehensively. And then the other piece of it is just having that oversight from a business performance unit that is not delivering the service, but is overseeing the documentation, the information, the performance metrics. That's within transportation, but a separate unit that can provide those checks and balances and make sure the reporting is consistent and thorough.
Excellent. So I have a kind of a broader, to that point with the checks and balances, I have a broader question. And I was wondering if the city manager is present in the meeting, or maybe Tracy?
Yes, I'm here.
Good morning, Tracy.
Hi.
So Tracy, I was just wondering, so of course in these audits, I think it comes up every agenda when we talk about service levels across the city, whether it's transportation services, which is probably not to say that they're all important, but definitely with transportation services, but many of other divisions, whether it's parks, sports, recreation, and go on. Are there service level standards that we expect, like, city council, we have those service level standards. Sorry, trying to get my thoughts here. And do we have checks and balances across the organization to make sure that we're getting value for money and that the services that we expect as a city, especially with contracted out and in-house, are being delivered?
So through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question, Councillor Ford. And, certainly historically how we've dealt with service levels has been very much at budget time, and it's, how much money gets spent and how much do you get for that money, and we carry on. And what you're seeing now is a change in the conversation where we're more focused on outcomes and what are we actually delivering for the money that we're spending, right? So I think, the organization has matured and continues to mature in how it measures performance. I think Vince and Barbara have both done a good job at articulating some of the changes transportation has made and continue to grow in that area. But it really is, when we talk about service levels, I think it's really that the focus needs to be on what is it we're trying to accomplish and what does it cost us to accomplish that, really outcome focused, I think, which gets to the point of the conversation of value for money. And we're not there yet. We're in like I say, different stages of maturity, but it is absolutely the evolving conversation that we're having, and critically now, given the circumstances that we have found ourselves in.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So just to wrap this up, would you welcome a motion, because I think we're going to have to put this on pause. Would you welcome a motion if we work together on maybe a direction of some sort of checks and balances in all city divisions?
Sure. Certainly it's something that we need to do, and we do as management, making sure that people are delivering. But there's, like I say, there's always room for improvement. But again, focusing on are the outcomes we're getting what we are needing to get and how we're spending our money. So we're happy to improve accountability, because that is a key important aspect of what we owe people.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Ford. Are there any other questions of staff on this item that may be done in open format? Just make sure. Okay, so members, I'm going to recommend that we stand this item down and we push it over to the end of the agenda so that we can go into camera. I know Councillor Fillion's got some questions. It may inspire a few of us to ask what we need to in camera. And I'm going to ask the Auditor General to head over to item number AU. I'm sorry, if we can go over to item AU 6.3, which is strengthening accountability and outcomes for affordable housing, understanding the impact of the Affordable Home Ownership Program. And I will recognize that we have 3 speakers, and I will thank them for their patience. And we'll move that item ahead to accommodate those speakers. And then we will go to AU 6.1 and 6.4, which we have agreed to join together. Madam Auditor General, I am aware that you have a brief presentation on this matter. And if you are ready to go, I will welcome you to begin that. Then we will go to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to thank the team members who are on the screen, would be Assistant Auditor General Anna Chan and Bruna Galali, and of course also management for assisting with us. The presentation on the next slide, the overview, we're going to give a bit of a background. We're going to give you information related to the key themes, and we're going to just wrap it up. It's going to be a short presentation. Next slide, please. And then the next slide, please. So we have a theme, and we've been working down the continuum of the housing continuum. We looked at, we did a report called Opening Doors to Stable Housing, which looked at the social housing wait list. We did Safeguarding Rent Geared Income Assistance, that's the RGI eligibility. We also looked at TCHC, revitalization, moving forward together to make sure that, you know, the broader city priorities around affordable housing were being met. So in this, next slide, please. This program, the Affordable Housing Ownership Program, the program is really aimed at making homes more affordable by providing interest-free loans. The objective is to assist low and moderate income renters in purchasing homes. And the city is accountable to make sure the program operates effectively, but proponents partner with the city to help to deliver these programs. And I guess the overall theme for me in this area is that this program is a long-standing program. We don't speak to the merits of the program in that we know there are a lot of benefits, and certainly that's really council's role to identify what the programs are for and the outcomes it wants to see. Our theme in this report is really refreshing that. Since this program has been established, there's been a lot of new insights from proponents, the city, and we have had complaints in this area in relation to documentation and challenges. And although we didn't find things like fraud, we do see an opportunity to make sure that the documentation is strengthened, to make sure that we can track whether the program is achieving the outcomes that City Council intends. So that's really the theme of this program. So ultimately, the city is accountable. It's not about cutting a program. It's really about strengthening the city's oversight to make sure what it wants to happen does happen. Next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight, we've had complaints in this area since 2010, and really some of the issues that existed in 2010 still exist today, but the focus should really be on refreshing the program. So I put this slide in just so that you know that we've had issues, but I think it's really about clarity. Clarity among who you're trying to reach, that kind of thing, and making sure that the program is operating and how it should operate, and then measuring against that. Next slide, please. So there's three key themes, as you can see on the slide, and then after this, I'll ask my Assistant Auditor General, who led this project, to continue to comment. So really, it's about, making sure that the program is achieving its objectives, supporting the program by strengthening the design to make sure they can report back to council, and council can be assured that what it thinks is happening. And it's really about enhancing the city's oversight and guidance. So this is what the theme of the report was. Over to Ina.
Next slide, please. So the first theme really is about the Housing Secretariat in the past has focused on measuring the number of opportunities it's created. And we've recommended that the Housing Secretariat look at ways to measure the broader effectiveness and impact of this program. And in particular, whether the assistance is making home ownership affordable for low to moderate income households. For example, we found that some households had shelter costs that were higher than 30% of their reported income, with some with mortgage payments that exceeded their reported income. So better aligning purchase prices, requirements with income can support ensuring households can afford to carry the cost of home ownership. We've also recommended that the city understand why loans are repaid within a relatively short period of time. 65% of loans that we reviewed were discharged within 5 years. Collecting better data will help the Housing Secretariat understand were households unable to carry the cost of home ownership and therefore had to sell to repay? Or did people pay off the loan because they no longer needed the assistance? Or was the home purchased and then flipped? This data will help the city identify if program improvements are needed. Ongoing affordability has also been a long-time city objective. Our report highlights that the city should continue to pursue measures to keep units affordable beyond the point of resale. Next slide, please. A more fulsome evaluation of outcomes and impacts will better inform the Housing Secretary in the city on whether adjustments need to be made to the program. And this is the opportunity to refresh the program and to look at how it prioritizes and allocates funding for its affordable housing initiatives and programs. Next slide, please. Bruno Galli is going to take you through the last two themes.
Thank you, Assistant Auditor General. Can we move it to the next slide, please? So the second theme is around supporting program intent by strengthening program design. Our recommendations focus on ways to enhance program requirements to help make sure everyone getting assistance meets the program's intent. We found that proponents often gave out loans on a first-come, first-served basis, and we recommend that the city provide guidance on how to allocate funding based on need or prioritization. For example, by using a sliding scale, which basically means allocating the amount of funding to households based on income or other criteria, the city can better tailor loan amounts based on need. We also found that some files we reviewed, while meeting the city's eligibility requirements, certain factors for these files suggest that they could be better aligned with the spirit of the program. And this included applicants with significant assets, income increasing shortly after applying or around closing, or who did not reside in Toronto at the time they applied, meaning that their home purchase was unlikely to free up rental housing in Toronto, which is a goal of the program. We did note that other jurisdictions in Ontario and across Canada have implemented eligibility criteria addressing some of these areas. Next slide, please. Our third and final theme is enhancing city oversight and guidance. So as the Assistant Auditor General mentioned earlier, although the program is delivered through private and nonprofit developers, the city is ultimately accountable. And we found that the city can strengthen its oversight and monitoring of the program, especially in monitoring the achievement of targets for affordable homeownership opportunities. When multiple proponents are experiencing challenges, this suggests that something in the program design needs to be addressed. And with better information, the city will be able to determine the root causes, understand why this is happening, and work with proponents to find solutions to improve impact and outcomes. We also recommended the city enhance its program guidance to help reinforce consistent and practical application of program requirements. And this really includes areas like income and residential tenancy verification, and also making sure the city gets better quality data to support better program evaluation. Next slide, please. So thank you, and now I'll pass the presentation back to the Auditor General, who will conclude.
So just to recap, this is really about making sure that we refresh what this program was meant to do. Who is it meant to serve? Are we serving the people in most need? How can we do this? Consultation with the community. There are proponents, there are the city, people who've worked in this area for 10 years. There's new ideas. There's other jurisdictions we've pointed to. Great ideas out there. So let's leverage those ideas and to find the best way, and then measure and document and have consistency so that the city can demonstrate that it's meeting the objectives and the service level outcomes in the cost-effective way. So that's really what the presentation's about, and I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Auditor and the audit team.
Sorry, there's a few slides for the Housing Secretariat would like to go over. Sorry, it's at the end of the slide deck, so if you go to the next slide, it'll show. And Abby Bond is here from the Housing Secretariat.
Excellent, thank you. I see you on camera, Abby, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So we just have a few slides before speakers. And so we just want to comment on the Auditor General's findings. So next slide, please. So our team has worked closely with the Auditor General's team, and we're really pleased to see the findings today. We agree with all the recommendations that have made, and in fact, they're very helpful for us as we look ahead to next year and look to do a more fulsome program review and refresh for the Affordable Homeownership Program. All of the recommendations will help us focus more specifically tying this program and the opportunity here to our affordable housing goals. It will definitely result in operational improvements for us, specifically around record keeping, reporting, and eligibility reviews, as well as more generally around oversight and our ability to meet targets. Next slide, please. So I would just want to say that the Affordable Homeownership Program is a partnership program. It is a very important part of our housing spectrum, and it supports many people from moving from rental into homeownership. It's included in our Housing TO 10-year plan, and we have an annual target of 400 new affordable homeownership homes every year. It is a partnership, as I've mentioned. The program is delivered by nonprofit and private sector developers looking to provide down payment assistance to eligible purchasers. Through the work of these groups and this program, we've seen over 1,200 affordable homeownership loans delivered since 2010 with a value of about $52 million. This includes city investment and also federal and provincial money as well. Next slide, please. So next steps for us, we recently had a multi-year implementation plan approved by council, and we're now going to move forward on that next year. We're going to be very much guided by this in terms of our collaboration and consultation with program delivery partner. So being able to take the auditor's recommendations and the multi-year implementation plan that we were moving forward in anyway to review and assess and refresh the program over the next year. As I've said before, with the assistance of the Auditor General's findings, this review will make sure that we're able to make more efficiencies, enhance the service delivery, enhance the program, and ultimately enhance the impact to the public in our city. And the Housing TO implementation plan does require us, or we've committed to do an annual update to council by Q2 of each year. And so this gives us the opportunity to continue to report to council on changes to the program. Thank you for your time this morning. Happy to answer questions later.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn this over to members of council. Are there any questions of the staff on the item? I apologize. Before we do that, we do have 3 speakers. And so I'll just ask Julie if I can have the first name. Our first speaker is Ian Underwood from Habitat Humanity, GTA.
Hi, everyone. Am I on deck?
Yes, you are, Ian. You've got 5 minutes. Welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Underwood, and I'm the CEO at Habitat for Humanity GTA. We've been an affordable housing partner with the City of Toronto for over 30 years, and our homeowners have been recipients of 147 of the loans that have been under review in this report. In your written version of this deputation, I've also included a profile of one of those families, the Kabir family, just to give you a sense of how this program is changing lives for the better in household after household. We, too, are very appreciative of the Auditor General's review, and we are generally supportive of all of the recommendations. Before commenting on the report itself, I think it's important to start with the elephant in the room, and that is with the average price of homes in the City of Toronto sitting at $1 million and detached homes averaging $1.5 million, does it still make sense for the city to be investing in enabling lower-income households to become homeowners? And at Habitat for Humanity, and you've heard from the Housing Secretariat, we believe the answer must be an unequivocal yes. The reality is that in this country, the proven path to building household wealth and multi-generational advancement has been home ownership. Those of us who are homeowners can look forward to a relatively secure retirement. We're likely in a position to help our children become homeowners. We have an asset to leverage to start a business or advance our or our children's education. And we can live every day with that pride of having our home and being a master of our destiny on whether we change our home or decide to move. I'd hazard a guess that most members of council are homeowners, and that's a pretty safe guess because 65% of Torontonians do own their home. But in a year when we're paying more attention than ever to systemic racism, inequality, and privilege, we also need to recognize that in this city, in our higher income neighborhoods, which are predominantly ownership, 73% of those residents are white, and in our lower income neighborhoods, which are predominantly rental, 69% of those residents are racialized. And so if we're truly committed to an inclusive city in which everyone has an opportunity to prosper, we absolutely cannot be saying to our racialized citizens or our millennials, sorry, it's too late, it's too expensive, and now your only option is ownership. And that's why it's so critically important, as you've already heard from from the Auditor General and the Secretariat, for us to embrace these opportunities to improve this program. And in that regard, there's three things I want to flag. Ensure we're helping the right people. And you've heard that before. Habitat also fully supports the notion of let's look at program eligibility, let's look at data capture. We did an analysis of the 147 loans that our homeowners have received, and we found that only 2% of those loans were discharged within 5 years and 5% within 10. This is very understandable because the Habitat program focuses exclusively on working lower income families, and they are looking for a place to put down roots and raise their children in the same neighborhood, in the same school through to adulthood. And I might further add that to my earlier point about racial inequities, 96% of Habitat homeowners are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. The second point is this notion of making sure we're setting owners up for success and that they're not over-leveraged. And we fully agree that that's an area to look at. In the case of the Habitat, we have a very rigorous assessment of applicants. We look at their housing need, at their debt levels, at other assets, at all sources of income. We then work very closely with our credit union partners to ensure that the family mortgage payments, including condo fees and property taxes, will not exceed 32%. And then our program is structured so that we hold a silent second mortgage for the balance of the market value of the home. Now, all Habitat homeowners also go through extensive homeownership preparation process to prepare them for success, and we maintain a relationship with them over the 20 years of their mortgage. The final thing the report has flagged is this notion of, can we keep these homes affordable from one homeowner to the next? And this is an area that Habitat has been a strong proponent of, and we've been working quite a bit with the Housing Secretariat on the mechanics of that over the last year. As the report noted, there are issues to sort out in legal framework. There's also considerations to make about property taxes, about loan repayment, but we are 100% on side to sort out how we can pursue that kind of objective. So the bottom line is count on us to continue to be full partners in reviewing, improving, and continuing with this program. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ian. Are there questions for the speaker from members of council? I did have one for you. I noticed your submission, your written submission. Thank you for that. There was a concept in there I wondered if you could just help me better understand. And I'm going to paraphrase by memory here because I don't have the document in front of me. But essentially, you presented the idea that if there were restrictions on the resale value of a property, you raised the question about fairness over basing property tax on the value of the property, and also that I guess, fairness in if the owner was to go and resell the property, that there would be some idea of compensation or different treatment because they couldn't realize the full market value. And I wondered if you could help me understand the concepts. As you appreciate, these are very, very thick and heavy policies. And you raised something that I hadn't seen before or didn't expect, and I hope you help me understand it.
Mr. Chair, thank you for raising the question. And as you said, these things get complex quickly. There's really two dimensions in thinking about, I'll start with the property tax thing that we have flagged. So the one is the fairness thing that I said in the report. So if a homeowner is never going to be able to, so first of all, for us to keep homes affordable in the long run, by definition, it really means we have to restrict the equity lift on those homes. And so if in order for a proponent like us or any other affordable homeowner or the city to buy those homes back and make them available to another affordable homeowner. So if the taxes become based on the same home across the street where those homeowners can have full equity lift, it does bring into question fairness. More importantly, if the homeowners are paying the full freight of taxes based on the full market value of the home, it significantly pushes up the income levels that we can support. So our objective here is, and to keep it under that 32% or 30% of household payments on shelter. So if we're really trying to help lower income households get that toehold into building financial independence, thinking critically about the property taxes are important. And the repayment of the loans falls in a similar category. The more you restrict the equity, the less equity the homeowner has to buy to the next home. So some of the modeling we're starting to do now ourselves is, so is there a bit of a quid pro quo where if all of the loans were not fully repayable, if we provided that as an equity lift to the homeowner, would that be a win-win for everyone? And again, remember, I spoke about the racialized issue. The fact of the matter is, a large number of people who are not homeowners now are not homeowners because of systemic racism and factors that have created barriers to them. And so we need to think about how do we create bridges. So diversity as our strength is something that is made very real for everyone.
Thank you. I had no further questions, and I'm just looking. There are none indicated from the members of the committee. So thank you for joining us, and I will welcome our next speaker, Tim Jones from Artscape.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Tim. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak to this committee. Given that the affordability crisis is one of the biggest and I would say most pernicious challenges that residents, that the city has, I think what residents of Toronto really need is city departments and their agencies to work together and with other governments and those of us who are in the affordable housing development business to really create an enabling environment for affordable housing. And that environment needs to kind of encompass policies, incentives, the coordination sort of between various players, resources, and hopefully it's an environment that actually fuels innovation sort of and leads to scalable models for affordable housing. Affordable ownership, I would argue, has to be a really bigger part of that strategy than it currently is. It's good and in and of itself in that, as Ian has just talked about, it actually helps people get into home ownership. It also kind of takes pressure off the affordable or the rental market and makes space for people, more people in the affordable rental world. The auditor's report found that this program over the last 10 years landed just 360 loans that were both approved and issued and met only 65% of the target over 10 years, which I would sort of argue that it is really woefully inadequate. The important takeaway, I think, from this report, it isn't just that a few people might have been served by this program who maybe should not have been, or that loans would have been repaid sort of very quickly in some cases. I'm not opposed to any of the recommendations in particular about tightening the program up and making sure that it serves its objectives. But really, I think the takeaway has to be that we have the opposite of an enabling environment in our city for affordable ownership housing development. We have many different players that are part of this world: the Housing Secretariat, the Planning Department, CreateTO, and now the Auditor General getting involved, which I think is welcome. But I think the truth is that we work in silos, and it's becoming harder and harder. We have found at Artscape harder and harder to actually make affordable ownership projects happen. We have kind of developed and operate sort of 80 of the affordable home ownership units that are identified in this report, and they serve artist-led families in 4 different properties that we've developed. A good case in point of what I'm talking about is the Artscape Toronto Lofts project, which we opened in 2011. It was an innovative new model where we created 70 affordable housing units for artists and their families. We say we created them literally out of thin air. They were designed to be affordable for artists forever. It's a complicated thing. We purchased the units from the developer at the cost of construction. And in those days, 2009, it was a meager $150 a foot. It didn't include any land value, didn't include any profit or soft costs. The developer kicked those things in. And in order to make the deal work for him, the city added 2 floors, the equivalent amount of height and density to the project that took land value and profit out of the equation. We sold 48 of the units through an affordable home ownership program, not unlike the auctions model, where there's in this case, a 25% second mortgage that was interest and payment free. But it was modified in a couple of important ways. We required the units to be resold through us at an appraised price to another qualified artist-led family, and there was a shared appreciation component too. We used the proceeds to cross-subsidize the balance of 22 affordable rental units without requiring any public subsidy in order to make it happen. It was a great success. We thought over the next 10 years, open in 2011, that we would develop maybe 700, maybe 7,000 units on this model. Today, I'm sorry to tell you, we've only been able to develop 28 units on this model. What happened? The planning department took over the negotiation with the developer. We then were buying units at market value rather than just the cost of construction. The city's definition of affordable home ownership is unworkable for all of us who are developing. There's no incentive for the private sector to get involved. So it's really a minor miracle today if you're able to pull off an affordable home ownership project. And while I welcome the sort of auditor's report, I hope that we'll be able to work together with all of the players in order to build this enabling environment that will make it much easier to create affordable home ownership now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any questions of the speaker from members of the committee? I see none. Thank you for joining us, Tim. With that, I will welcome our next speaker. Heather Tremaine? Tremaine. From Options for Homes. And forgive the pronunciation, the masks make it hard to get just all the letters right. So thank you, Heather. Welcome to the committee. I hope you can hear us loud and clear.
Yeah, again.
You may commence speaking. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Holiday, members of the committee. It's good to be here this morning. On behalf of Options for Homes, I'm happy to be here to respond to the Auditor General's report. We've been a long-time partner of the city, and we are an organization that's driven by the mission to make homeownership more accessible. And we are also committed to helping to strengthen the program that was under review by the auditor. We, as Options for Homes, if you don't know, are Canada's largest nonprofit developer of affordable homeownership housing for moderate and middle-income households. In the last 25 years, we've built over 3,000 units in the Toronto area, and we have another 232 in construction, and an additional 2,000 in our pipeline. We were born in Toronto and are very much based in Toronto. We have a project right now in construction, as I mentioned, in Councillor Nunziata's ward. It is, and thank you once again to the councillor who was incredibly supportive. We are actually on site there and in construction since July and on budget and on time at this moment anyways. And we are really, we consider ourselves partners with the city. We co-invest with the city. And you know, we also believe that we're city builders. We have built in a number of key areas in the city, in the distillery, and in the junction. Before those were the communities that they are, we were the original developers in those areas of a large scale. And what we do really is we provide down payment support for people. Like the city's money, we provide up to 15% of the value of a home, which means we can lower the cost of carrying, we can lower the qualifying incomes, and really help underserved people get into housing. And I think without, we have never tracked ethnicity data on our purchasers, but much like the way that Ian spoke to it, we are serving kind of people who would be systemically denied opportunities for ownership and wealth and asset building. This program is an important program, and I would say it's a sustainable program in the sense that, you know, it's lent and it comes back to the city. It is a loan program. It comes back to the city with appreciation and then is available on an ongoing basis. And we use that because we match it with our funds. I'll give you an example. We have used this program on 3 of our recent projects. On the latest 2 projects, the city has invested $10.8 million, and we've invested over $23 million. So your funds are significantly leveraged in a program like ours. And that has provided housing overall on those 2 buildings of 480 new units. We have been working most recently, I think we're quite interested in the impact of the affordable ownership in general. We haven't, you know, I don't know that there's good work in terms of, there's a lot of generalized ideas about what affordable housing can do for people. But we are actually embarking on an impact study of our own to help us better understand the full picture of the impact of ownership on our purchasers. But we also want to give you a little sense of who is buying our units. So we have in our recent project a single mother who's a teacher, who has an income of $64,000 a year, who bought a one bedroom in Den for herself and her son. We have a couple that's 60. She's a legal assistant and the primary breadwinner, and they were able to purchase a home, and they bought it for the security of tenure, that they weren't feeling as renters. We have a single woman who makes $70,000 a year, who's a nonprofit manager. She was able to buy a one-bedroom home with a very small amount of additional dollars from the Hope Fund. We have a family with 3 children. These are new Canadians, a household income of $65,000, who bought their first home. So these are the people. This is the real impact of this, of these kinds of programs, and these are the people. We're helping first-time home purchasers. 65% of our purchasers are renters moving out of bringing up rental stock. So these are the workers of the city that are able to stay in the city as a result of our programs. So I just want to conclude by saying we are quite happy to be engaged and participate in looking at how these programs can be improved, how we can ensure we're all reaching the groups we want to reach, and how we can strengthen these programs. I think they're vital. It's a vital part of housing in the city, and I think that there are definitely opportunities we can to improve and strengthen the offering.
Thank you very much. With that, are there any questions from members of the committee for the speaker today? I do not see any. Thank you very much for joining us today. With that, I will ask members if there are any questions of staff on the item. Not see any. I will ask one question of staff on my own, and I believe this is for Abby. Abby, I'm going to characterize the program here, and it may or may not be fair, but I'll just call it as a passive program, for the lack of a better description. And I think the report talks to us about some changes that need to be made to make it a more active and viable program, but there's a big goal of 400 units per year, and that's quite different than what we've seen in terms of the performance so far. I think my question is the Housing Secretariat, what do you need to really move this into an active program, to push it, to promote it, to get more people on board? Yes, you need the changes that are in the auditor's report, but do you need changes to your team and to your group to have a different oversight or administration of how this works, knowing that a lot of the lifting is done by the independent organizations out there, but centrally, perhaps we have a job as a city to propel this forward and get more people on board for all of the reasons that are described in the report and in the housing plan, to get people uptaking the opportunities here.
So thank you for the question. I think I like the way you've characterized it as potentially moving to something that's more proactive. We see these recommendations as being an excellent foundation on which to layer on some other steps, which we were hoping to take anyway, but this really roots our next steps in really strong ways forward. So we have an implementation plan which Council just approved, and as part of that, we are also doing a review of governance of the Housing Secretariat and the way that we deliver housing and the way our other partner organisations do housing within the City of Toronto. So that's an important addition to this refresh of this program. And then, as we've heard, I think another key thing is, as we've heard from our 3 affordable homeownership proponents this morning, from Habitat, from Artscape, and for Options, we have willing partners with us to take these recommendations and be able to move forward in a really strong way, refresh the program and meet those targets and hopefully exceed them over the years to come. So I think we're positioned well for that, but knowing that we have significant work ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question, and perhaps I'm going to suggest that the auditor take this one. But one of the ideas from the report is to go back and ask people why they closed their loan early, and likely it's as a result of the sale of a unit. And I think, Madam Auditor, you acknowledge in the report that, there's a lot of legitimate reasons why that occurs. Maybe what we're worried about are the reasons that are less optimal with respect to the program. And any thoughts or ideas on how we would validate and make sure that the information that's coming back is accurate and correct with respect to the reasons? And not everybody's going to say, well, I decided I needed to move and there was a change in my life, case closed. And in particular, you want to circle in on those instances where maybe the program wasn't the right match and nobody wants to talk about it.
I'm going to start, and my Assistant Auditor General may add something. It's really about asking the question and keeping the documentation so that the Housing Secretariat can continue to analyze and work with proponents to address situations where what the outcome is not exactly what was intended. So it's really about just documenting. We have some proponents who have a very low payment early. Some have higher, and it's not that either one is good or bad. We need to examine why it's happening and make sure that if the reasons aren't what the city would like it to be, that the processes be put in place and the documentation is kept just so that the city can be assured that it's getting the outcomes it needs. Ina, Assistant Auditor General, anything else? No, we're good.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? I do not. Are there any members wishing to speak on this item? Does anyone wish to move the report? Councillor Ford? Councillor Ford is moving the recommendations contained in the report. I ask all those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. Thank you very much. Okay. Members, you'll recall that we have agreed to join AU 6.1 and AU 6.3. We do not have public speakers on this item. Madam Auditor General, I know that you have a presentation on both of those items. I'm just being mindful of the hour and trying to coordinate the completion of this and other aspects. We would ask that you please continue with your presentation. And feel free to connect the presentations together if that's suitable.
Yes, if you can just put up the first slide, please. I'd like to thank Laura Wright, who was the lead on this project. And to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation. I'm going to focus on the first couple of slides. And really, what this is about is really helping to understand the audit process. This is a situation where in 2016, while we're conducting our audit of the prior benefits administrator, we noticed a lot of issues related to, maybe some audits not being done, very low sampling. There wasn't the ability, for example, when there was a problem with a provider, to go and identify how many city employees were at that provider, to do that very quickly so that you could launch an investigation. That's changed. We recommended to have upfront controls, and those controls are in place. And I'm happy to report that the city has incorporated the controls. And what we're seeing is, for example, instead of maybe at a 1.2 million claims, 300 items selected for audit, there's like 20,000 selected for audit. I know when I get, when I submit a claim, I get asked for documentation once or twice over the year. And so things are being checked. Providers are being sampled, and we have a claim watch program in place through GSC just to watch the claims. So this is a situation where the city has taken the recommendations, has implemented the recommendations, and what we see are the results now. And to focus on the results, we want to move to the next slide. It's why this investigation matters. It's truly important that the city understand and the city employees understand we have sophisticated detection controls in place. So the work that we're doing, the claim watch program from GSC, the benefit provider is using, they're using artificial intelligence, they're using various ways. So we're detecting more fraud. And this is one example of a case, but there's more fraud being detected, not because there's more happening, but because we're rooting out the issues or the problem providers. The second most important thing to take away is to educate employees. I won't go into the details of this case, but essentially what we see are employees maybe not crystallizing that what they're doing is fraud. And sometimes people will say, it's okay, we do it all the time, or don't worry, they won't catch it. That world has changed, and it's really important that employees know that. And so we're asking to the city to really beef up its education of employees, and we provided this case because it's going to help employees if they think they're in a situation like this to make the right decision. And the third thing is really to deter those who are thinking about committing fraud, either the employee side or the provider side. I selected this case in particular because it had to do with a provider and we had concerns about the provider, but you know, it could happen in any case. Joining this to the dental audit, which was the, not audit, it's a dental continuous controls data analytics. We use data analytics to test our dental benefits program. And what we're seeing is we didn't find fraud. What we found was lots of audits that have been happening. We found where we identified high risk, the Claim Watch program did identify high risk. We had some additional items. We're working in sync to make sure those items that require further review will be reviewed. So these are good results. There was another recommendation from our audit, which was that the city audit the provider and make sure that their controls are in place. And that hadn't happened before. The city has done that, and the provider's results and my results are similar. So, you know, on the one hand, yes, there's fraud here, but what the systemic issues with the city have been plugged. And this is a good lesson for the winter maintenance. Getting the contracts right, monitoring against that, you're going to have results where we went in to do the dental analytics and we didn't find, you know, the same issues we had before. So that's great. Now, one of the things on the slide, I don't have in front of me, but for AU 6.4, we made recommendations. We found a plan design. We'll just leave it on this slide for a minute in relation to dental. And what we're saying is, if we understand that there's a union agreements in place, we're not saying that they should be ignored. We're not saying that at all. But as we move forward, we are in a different world right now. The city is challenged for money. And instead of 100% of the claims being paid, so if I have my claim for dental, 100% is paid in relation to basic coverage, it's for the employee to pay maybe 10 cents on the dollar, that can add up. So in the city's program, if employees paid for 10 cents on the dollar related to any claims they submitted for massage or dental or, you know, any kind of orthotics, that's a $50 million to an $80 million, $50 million for 10 cents on the dollar, $80 million for 15 cents on the dollar, and that's over 5 years. And so it's quite substantial, and that money can certainly help a lot of programs. So the city's negotiated contracts, it's important to respect that, but the city is working with the unions in a joint benefit consultation program where people have come together. And this might be something that's worth discussing because as a city, we're very fortunate to have our jobs, and it's very important to provide services. And so there may be opportunities in this new environment to explore that more. And that would be on a futuristic basis, and it would certainly be in consultation, and it would be for the city to do that. We just wanted to point that out as a potential opportunity. So that summarizes this program. The contracts are in place, it's working, the testing is working, the fraud is being picked up, and going forward, there's opportunities to continue to refine the plan for the city to, you know, get some more money into the coffers if that's what it chooses to do.
Thank you, Madam Auditor, for the presentation. Are there any questions of the auditor or staff with respect to this item from members of the committee? Seeing none, Thank you. I will ask if there's any members wishing to speak on this item. There are not. And I will note it's item 6.1 and item 6.4. I do wish to speak very briefly on this item and place two motions, which I'll ask if the clerk may put them on the screen because I'm going to have to go by memory on what they say. So the first, and I'll paraphrase very briefly, and it is just the fact that the integrity of the system is very important to anyone that's observing it or participating, whether it's employees participating in the system or it's members of the public looking outside. And I think it's important that council signal that this is important to us, and this is simply a report back to tell us more about the outcome of what eventually the process will work through. And we'll ask the Director of Pension Payroll and Employee Benefits to seek reimbursement and to come back with us with what the outcome is. And the second item. Perhaps I'll paraphrase as it comes up. It's really just to make sure that this report and the recommendations finds its way into the process, because as the auditor rightfully indicated, we don't just go and change, co-payment and ratios at the Audit Committee. It follows a process, and it has to do with the work with management and employees. And so this just makes sure that the idea flows into the right place and the discussion for the necessary changes happens in an orderly way. I trust members will find those both functional. And with that, I will, as I always do, thank the Auditor General and the city's management team and everyone that participated in these audits. And in particular, the one about the medical spa, it's got an eye-catching title to it. It's quite the story if you read through it. Incredible amounts of detail and really some activities that raise your eyebrow. And all the pieces are in this report that all of the affected authorities will be informed of this. And the work will continue on ironing out all of what happened and what all the details are. But it really is a testament to the system that we have in place and a fairly sophisticated set of occurrences, and it shows that the system picked it up and it was brought forward for a closer look. So I very much appreciate that, and hopefully all members of the committee will agree with the recommendations, and we will pass that in just a moment. So on the two items that I have placed before you, the amendments, all those in favor? Any opposed? Both of those are carried. And then on the item itself, the Auditor General's recommendations, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. So with that, we do have one item left. I'm just going to check with the clerk I've got that right. It's a long list. And that is the winter road maintenance program. And we do have to have a motion to go into camera. And do I have any volunteers to place that motion? Councillor Ford. Madam Clerk, will just check. Do we need Councillor Ford to read that motion?
Yeah, if you could just give us a minute.
Okay. So the clerks will just take a moment because of the system that we've got. We just want to make sure we've got it all in order. Councillor Ford, I don't know if you would be interested in including in your motion a motion to extend to finish the item. We've got about 40 minutes to go, and just in case we go a bit over, we'll make that a functional component of this motion that's to go forward.
I'm happy to move that as well.
And to just check with the other members, we're good to go a little bit past 12:30. Thank you. Councillor Ford, if you wouldn't mind reading that aloud, if you can see that on your screen.
Yep, I can. I move that the Audit Committee recess its public session to meet in closed session to consider this item as it pertains to the security of the property of the city or local board, litigation, or potentially matters before administrative tribunals affecting the city or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose.
All those in favor of the motion before us? Any opposed? And that item is carried. Thank you. I will ask the clerk to temporarily close the meeting to members of the public and to only provide access to members and appropriate staff for the closed session portion of this meeting. In addition, the YouTube live stream will be suspended until the closed session is over. Members, I will also remind you to arrange your surroundings so that no other person observes any part of the closed session debate. Thank you. Members, if you can just bear with us for a moment, the clerk has to go.
so we will expel her from the closed session. And I just wanted clarification from the DCMs and from the Auditor General's office, just out of an abundance of caution, and also from the General Manager, Transportation Services, that all of the individuals that you see on the call are all properly in camera. I believe that they are, but I just want to be abundantly cautious on this.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Transportation Services.
Yeah, there are 4 lawyers on the line.
I'll defer to my learned colleagues on their people.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, members. There's a bit of a process to make sure that the many, many names on the list are all accounted for, and I'm glad we did that. I'll turn it over to Councillor Fillion. You had indicated some questions in camera. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, and I may bounce around a bit. I'll start with the Auditor General, and then it will probably result in questions of legal or city staff. Thanks for the report. Obviously, the city is out many millions of dollars, and
best to make the switch over, and this is the last item, so I'll ask your patience for a few more minutes. Madam Clerk, do I need a motion to reconvene? So just give us a moment. We'll get it up on the screen. If someone wants to volunteer to give that. Okay. May I move a motion to reconvene as read and recorded by the clerk? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. So just give us a moment and we will go through the technical checklist and rejoin in public. Thank you. Thank you. I'll call this meeting back to order. We have reconvened in public session. Just to recap, we have left the in-camera session on item number AU 6.2, Audit of Winter Road Maintenance Program, Phase 1, Leveraging Technology and Improving Design and Management of Contracts to Achieve Service Level Outcomes. And so that is the item before us, and I will ask members of the committee if there are any members wishing to speak on this item. Councillor Ford, I've got you. Please go ahead as soon as you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We're running into the lunch hour here, so I'll be brief. I'd like to place a motion that I have worked with Tracy cooked on, and it's more of a broad motion as soon as it comes up here, relating to all city divisions and not particular to transportation. And similar on the tone of what we've been discussing. As soon as it comes up here. There we are. So City Council requests the City Manager in consultation with the Auditor General report to the Audit Committee in the first quarter of 2021 with recommendations on policies and/or processes that would provide a system of review and audit of both in-house and contracted services within each city division, and that improves accountability to approved service levels, improves accountability to approved service levels, and delivers on outcomes that ensure optimal value for taxpayers' dollars. I think one of the frustrations I have seen, and I think I've said a few times in the committee, both not to go in depth of what we talked about in camera, but both in camera and in my questions earlier, is around, we set service levels across the city that our residents, all Torontonians, expect from our city services and expect from us. And a lot of the conversations that happen in this committee is kind of the lack or the I guess the gap of service and I think we need to be within city divisions, need to be constantly looking at the service levels and making sure that we're hitting those targets. And I think there should be something in place in all city divisions, not necessarily a whole new office or role, and I'm not going down that path, but just a process in which we are constantly evaluating and holding whoever it is to account, whether it's in-house or contracted out. So I would leave that to the city manager to kind of take away and look at how he would bring it back to us, to the audit committee. And in conversations with Tracy, I think a good point about this is that, look, the city going into the future has a tough road ahead, an incredibly difficult financial road that we need to be very cognizant of, and now more than ever. So I think value for money should be top of mind for all of us and for the entire city. And I think if we can get something back that would standardize a process, it would be very helpful. So hopefully that is pretty straightforward for my colleagues. If not, I'm happy to take questions on it.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there any other members wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, sorry, Councillor Fillion, there you are. Please go ahead.
Councillor Ford, for just a question, accountability to approved service levels. I wasn't quite sure what that phrase meant.
Mm-hmm. So, no, absolutely, Councillor Fillion. So, City Council, city divisions approve service levels, whatever division it may be, whether it's snow clearing or, programs in parks, forestry, recreation, whatever it may be, there's service levels that we hold, particularly that council approves, and that goes out in these contracts. What I'm saying is that we should constantly be benchmarking our, I guess, productivity and what we expect of contractors and, our staff in-house to be meeting those service levels. So within the city divisions, not waiting for the Auditor General to come in and say, there's this gap, there's whatever that may be.
But sure, I'm just questioning the wording. Just in this case, I don't think there was an issue with meeting the snow clearing service levels. It was the way it was done cost us millions of dollars. If I could just see the motion again, because I don't want us doing a lot of busy work just to say, we cleared the roads. This is, I think, more to get at the supervision of contractors, if that's what you were.
But within that, we hold contractors to service standards. So I think there should be something, I guess, uniform across the organization to constantly be looking at that.
Sure, certainly. Just
yeah.
I guess it's covered in the second part. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we weren't just doing the, you know, check a box on, yeah, we, you know, we met this standard, but, you know, in the meantime, how it was achieved is a huge mess.
I agree, Councillor Fillion. That's why I consulted with staff before placing it. I'm very cognizant of the fact that our staff's time during, especially right now during the pandemic, is very valuable. So I just don't want to check mark a box. I want to make sure that there was some value to this motion.
Okay, thank you. And then just to speak to the larger issue, I'm just going to say that I really find, you know, across all departments or across virtually all departments, there is a real lack of accountability in this place. And, you know, I'm, you know, very concerned about that and have made a number of motions about it, especially over the last couple of years. And am counting on the city manager and the deputy city managers and the general managers to ensure that we, you know, create a much better accountability system, measurement and consequences across all city organizations.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. Are there any other members wishing to speak? With that, I will make some brief comments myself. Madam Clerk, I know that there's a few motions that I have submitted. I think members will find them. Although the text is long, the ideas are quite straightforward. And if you can help me, Madam Clerk, just scroll through them as I go through them. I'm just going to paraphrase, but the first one is, so I think it's the Audit Committee was going to request the General Manager of Transportation Services to ensure that winter maintenance vehicles are equipped with a GPS device on an immediate and urgent basis. So if that's available to be changed, I think that's a correction. The second one is to look at the, I'm going to paraphrase again, to look at the winter maintenance fleet to make sure that they've all got GPS devices in them and to test them and to test the different reporting mechanisms all throughout the 2021 maintenance season. Actually, it goes beyond test, but use those reporting mechanisms. The third is to run reports after all of the snow plowing event. And so we know from the audit there's about 7 of them per season. And really that is to get into the heart of using the GPS system and compare it to what they see in the field and to do the reconciliations. And I've asked that they come back to the Audit Committee to tell us about how that worked out over this winter maintenance season. And I think that will be a good time for us to understand if we've been able to make a difference in the immediate term with some of the recommendations from the auditor. And the last is just to talk about quality here. We do have a lot of calls that go into 311. We get complaints that come through councillors' offices. And the idea here is to capitalize on the in-stream of complaints so that we can better both contract and performance manage the vendor. And we might as well use that data to the fullest extent. I'm not saying it's not used at all today, but I think to get at the heart of some of the concerns that members of council express, can we build a system around that? And the last I would say is, as everyone knows, there are those recurring issues that happen year after year after year where the plow hits the same tree or the same post or tears the same piece of bush or grass off of the edge of the road or the sidewalk. We know it as councillors, citizens know it. And I think the emphasis that I have on here is, can we find a better way to make sure that that knowledge is carried forward to the plow drivers and capitalized upon to just to have the best service that we've got possible. With there is one additional motion. And this one here is about the findings of the Auditor General. I think Council will be interested to get advice from our General Manager of Transportation and from the City Solicitor and the Auditor General on if there's opportunity to recover and to look at what has happened over the last few years in terms of performance, to look at the issue as discussed by the Auditor General about standby pay, and then also what to do for the next 2 years of the contract before it finalizes. And I anticipate that will be a report coming back to Council. So with that, I'll just say, thank you, of course, to the Auditor General and the staff of the Transportation Services Department. This is a really big deal. I remember when the contract went through Public Works, I was a very new councillor at the time, and thought, well, look at hundreds of millions of dollars that we're about to approve in this. This is a really big contract. And you get it, right? There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people involved. There's standby pay involved, and there's the cost of paying for all that equipment that's built into the price, right? You got to pay for the snow plows. They're not for free. But with a lot of moving parts, and anything with a lot of moving parts, there is always room for improvement. And, I thank the auditor for bringing the observations forward, because it gives the staff the license to go and make those changes. And it sets the expectation of council that we'll see there. And these numbers are material. As our speaker said today, a few $1 million saved, and it may be only 1% or 2% on a larger $90 million per year set of activities, is still a lot of money. And so, it's our expectation that that is going to be tailored and optimized. But with that, you get better customer service, you get happier citizens in the city, you get safer roads, and you get less salt dumped into the environment unnecessarily. And then on top of that, you save money. And so this is really, really important for the citizens of Toronto, that we do this the best that we can. And here we've got a whole set of ideas that we can employ going forward. The second piece that this does, and if you look at the auditor's recommendations, the first half of them out of the 21 are saying GPS, 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 GPS. And where did we hear that before at this audit committee? We heard that in the forestry reports. The emphasis on the availability of technology by the Auditor General is a clear message that Council has got, and I think the staff are hearing. I'm looking forward to ways that we can employ GPS systems on an enterprise level, because then everybody is going to do it equally well in the city. Everyone's going to know, every division department doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. If we can get it on an enterprise level, you can get the reports, you can know what you can get experts operating the system so that the business areas can think about business at the end of the day. But the most important thing out of that is that it frees up resources in the areas of expertise. And the thing that jumped out at me at this report was, if the GPS can be tracking when the plow comes in and out and when it stops and starts, and you can get an automatic report at the end of the day that you can reconcile, it means that the field staff don't have to spend time doing that. The computer does it for them. And frankly, they can do more important things like dealing with the bush and the grass that just got torn up and dealing with the constituents' needs. I mean, I know it's a simplified example, but we've got skilled staff here that really know how winter maintenance works, and we don't need them doing clerical stuff. We need them doing the higher order contract management, and we need every bit of resource that they've got to go and do this. And if we can help them by automating some of the process, it will make everyone's lives easier, and it will end up with a better quality result at the end. So members, I hope you can support the amendments that I've proposed. I think they're fairly straightforward and functional, and I think it just demonstrates that Council and this committee are interested in this subject, and that we want to see some reports back. And we're going to challenge the staff in the short term, because we've got to do some things before winter starts. And we've got to take advantage of what we can do over this winter season with respect to these processes. And then the ultimate goal, of course, is when the next set of contracts occur in 2 years, we have the chance to build in all of this learning and that we'll be experts at this system by that time, and we'll have a great product for the next tranche of contracts. So thank you to all the staff for all of your hard work on this, and especially to the Auditor General's Office for all the work that you've done, and everyone else that contributed to the audit. So with that, on Councillor Ford's amendment, all of those in favor? If I may just get some advice from the clerk here. The clerk is advising me that we're going to leave recommendation number 1 at City Council because of the nature of the direction. And I think the point is clear, is that the Audit Committee is interested in learning about the preparations going into winter, and we will take it in stride. So thank you, Madam Clerk, for that technical clarification. So on Councillor Ford's motion, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. On the motions that I have put forward, and I'm hoping we can do those in 2 parts. The first set of them on the technical pieces, all of those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And on the report back from the General Manager in consultation with Legal and the Auditor General, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And on the item as amended, all of those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Madam Clerk, I think that was our last item. And with that, that is the end of the meeting, and I will thank everybody for their participation and their patience as we work through the technical matters. I appreciate very much the meeting, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
I'll move adjournment.
So moved. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried.